The silence in the Galactic Council chambers was different today. Ambassador Jack Morrison could feel it pressing against his chest like a weight he had carried for too long. He stood at the human delegation podium looking out at the curved rows of alien representatives who had once called humanity their greatest allies. The Valdari with their silver skin sat in the front row, their large eyes watching him with what he had learned to recognize as concern. Behind them, the massive Keth delegates filled their oversized seats, their tusked faces unreadable as always. The insectoid Xerion representatives clicked their mandibles in their usual rhythm of impatience. Jack had given speeches in this chamber for 15 years. He had negotiated peace treaties that saved billions of lives. He had mediated trade disputes that could have collapsed entire star systems. He had stood here and convinced warring species to put down their weapons and talk instead of fight. Today would be different. Today he would say goodbye. The vote had been simple and final. The Galactic Council had voted 847 to 12 with 23 abstentions to hand over the human colony of New Montana to the Xerion Empire. The humans had built that world from nothing. They had terraformed its dead soil and filled its empty oceans with life. 50,000 human families lived there, farming the land and raising their children under an alien sun. The Xerions wanted it because their computer models said it would be useful for their expansion plans. The council said it would keep the peace. Jack cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice carried across the chamber through the translation devices that converted his words into hundreds of alien languages. Honored delegates, for 300 years humanity has served this council with dedication and sacrifice. We have given our ships to patrol your trade routes. We have sent our children to die in wars that were not ours to fight. We have shared our technology and our wisdom freely with all who asked. The Valdari ambassador Vel Theron leaned forward in his seat. Jack had worked with him for a decade. They had been friends once. Jack continued. We have mediated your disputes and prevented your wars. We have fed your hungry and healed your sick. We have asked for nothing in return except the right to exist in peace among you as equals and friends. A low murmur ran through the chamber. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Thornian representative made a gesture with her forearms that Jack recognized as distress. He had spent years learning their body language to better serve their needs. Today, you have voted to give away our world to appease those who demand it. You have decided that human lives and human dreams are acceptable currency for galactic stability. You have shown us that we are not your allies, but your servants, to be discarded when convenient. Jack paused and looked around the chamber one last time. We understand your message clearly. The chamber erupted in a dozen different languages as delegates tried to speak at once. The Keth General Morthak rose from his seat and began making the deep rumbling sounds that meant urgent protest in his language. Several Valdari were on their feet, gesturing frantically. The Xerion representatives sat perfectly still, their compound eyes glittering with what might have been satisfaction. Jack raised his hand and the chamber slowly quieted. Therefore, by unanimous decision of the United Human Governments, we are formally withdrawing from all galactic affairs effective immediately. All human personnel will be recalled from non-human space within 60 standard days. All military cooperation agreements are terminated. All trade treaties are void. All research partnerships are ended. The silence that followed was complete. Jack could hear the hum of the air circulation systems and the soft clicking of data recorders. He gathered his papers and walked toward the exit. Behind him, chaos began to break out as delegates realized what they had just heard. Captain Lisa Hayes was standing on the bridge of the UES Harbinger when the message came through. She had been listening to another angry exchange between the Zelak and Thornian negotiators about mining rights in the Kepler system. The same argument they had been having for 3 months. The same argument her ship had been sent to mediate. The message display lit up with priority encryption codes she had never seen before. The recall order was brief and clear. All human vessels were to withdraw from non-human space immediately. Operation Silent Departure was in effect. No exceptions, no delays, no explanations to be given. Lisa looked at her communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Wright. Send a message to both negotiating teams. Tell them we are terminating mediation due to an emergency recall. Wish them well in their future discussions. Amy stared at her captain. Ma'am, they've been trying to solve this for months. Without us, they'll probably start shooting at each other within a week. That's no longer our concern, Lieutenant. Send the message and plot a course for Earth. On the science station orbiting Kepler 442b, Dr. Kevin Shaw was reviewing the latest test results when his human colleagues began packing their equipment. The breakthrough in faster-than-light communication technology was so close he could taste it. Another few weeks, and they would have solved the transmission lag problem that had limited galactic communication for centuries. His Valkyrie partner Dr. Yel Mirren watched in confusion as the humans disconnected their quantum processors and loaded them into transport containers. Kevin, what is happening? We are so close to success. The Council will fund us for another year if we show them these preliminary results. Kevin sealed the last container and checked his list one more time. Everything was accounted for. Every piece of human technology was coming home. I'm sorry, Yel. We've been recalled. All of us. The project is terminated. But why? What emergency could be so important that you abandon years of work? We are partners, Kevin. Friends. We have worked side by side for 3 years. Kevin paused at the airlock door and looked back at his friend. Ask your government, Yel. Ask them about New Montana. Ask them how they voted. The galaxy's reaction was swift but scattered. The Valdari government sent urgent messages demanding explanations. The Keth military command asked if this was some kind of negotiating strategy. The Thornian Council offered to increase funding for human peacekeeping operations. The smaller species who had relied on human protection began to panic. All the messages received the same response, a simple automated reply that acknowledged receipt and thanked them for their interest in human affairs. Nothing more. President Helen Grant stood in the Oval Office, looking out at the lights of Washington, D.C. She had been in this job for only 2 years, but she felt like she had aged. A decade. The decision had not been easy, but it had been unanimous. Every human government on every human world had voted the same way. Enough was enough. Her aide knocked on the door and entered. Madam President, the Valdari ambassador is requesting an emergency meeting. So are 17 other delegations. What should I tell them? Tell them we're not available. We're no longer in the galactic affairs business. Helen turned away from the window. It's time humanity learned to mind its own business for a change. 6 months had passed since the last human ship left non-human space. Admiral Ryan Cole sat in his command chair aboard the UES Sentinel, watching the tactical display show dozens of red warning signals. The Keth-Varan War had finally erupted, just as everyone knew it would. For 30 years, human peacekeepers had maintained patrol routes between their territories. For 30 years, human diplomats had met with both sides every few months to discuss mining rights and shipping lanes. For 30 years, the galaxy had enjoyed peace in the spiral arm, because humans made sure both species stayed in their own space. Now Keth warships were bombing Varan mining stations, and Varan raiders were attacking Keth supply convoys. The death toll was climbing every day. Ryan could see it all happening on his screens, but his orders were crystal clear. Observe, but do not intervene. Document, but do not engage. Watch, but do not help. His communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Miller, looked up from his console. Sir, we're receiving another transmission from Keth Command. General Thakvor is requesting immediate assistance. He says their medical ships are being targeted and they need our protection. Ryan had known Thakvor for 8 years. They had worked together on anti-piracy operations in the Outer Rim. The general had saved Ryan's life. During the asteroid belt incident, when Keth ships had rushed to help a damaged human destroyer, now Thakvor was begging for help and Ryan had to ignore him. Send the standard response, Lieutenant. Acknowledge receipt and remind them that human forces are no longer involved in galactic security operations. Commander Amy Wright was in her quarters on the UES Guardian when the message from her old friend arrived. She had served alongside Keth forces for 5 years before the withdrawal. General Thakvor had been more than a colleague. He had been someone she trusted with her life. His message was desperate and personal. Amy, millions of my people are dying. The Varens are using biological weapons on our civilian populations. Our medical facilities cannot handle the casualties. We need human biomedical technology. We need your doctors. Please, for the sake of our friendship, help us. Amy stared at the message for an hour before responding. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard as she remembered all the times Thakvor had covered her back in combat. All the times they had shared meals and stories about their families. All the times he had called humans the finest warriors and the most honorable allies he had ever known. Her response was 4 words long. We are not available. The Galactic Council called 17 emergency sessions in the first 4 months after the human withdrawal. The beautiful chamber that had once hosted careful negotiations now echoed with angry shouting and desperate pleading. Species that had barely spoken to each other in decades were forced to work together without human translators and mediators. The Valdari Ambassador Vel Theron stood at the podium where Jack Morrison had delivered humanity's farewell speech. His silver skin had taken on a gray tint that showed stress and exhaustion. Honored delegates, we must find a solution to the Keth Varen conflict. 23 star systems are now involved in active combat. Refugee populations are fleeing to border worlds that cannot support them. The Thornian representative Kresh Ma gestured with all 4 arms in what her species considered extreme agitation. The humans always handled these situations. They had protocols and procedures. They knew how to make both sides listen to reason. We do not have their skills. The Xerion delegate Zekex 9947 spoke in the flat mechanical tone that marked his species. The humans chose to abandon their responsibilities. We must adapt to function without them. Perhaps this conflict will resolve itself through natural selection. Several delegates turned toward the Xerion with expressions of disgust. The Keth had been galactic allies for 2 centuries. The Varens had contributed to scientific advancement for just as long. The idea that they should be allowed to destroy each other was unthinkable to most species. But without human leadership and human compromise solutions, the Council could not agree on any action. Every proposal was blocked by someone. Every plan was rejected by at least one faction. The empty human seats seemed to grow larger every day. Back on Earth, President Helen Grant was meeting with her economic advisors. Secretary of Commerce Paul Davis spread charts and graphs across the conference table. The numbers told a story that surprised even the experts. Madam President, human economic output has increased by 18% since the withdrawal. Our trade networks are more efficient. Our resource allocation is more effective. We're not sending 60% of our manufactured goods to alien worlds as aid packages anymore. Helen studied the data carefully. For 3 centuries, humans had been the galaxy's charity organization. They had sent medical supplies to worlds that could afford to buy them. They had provided free military protection to species that had massive defense budgets. They had shared technological advances that other species then sold back to human colonies at inflated prices. What about our former trading partners? How are they managing without access to human markets? Treasury Secretary Karen Clark pulled up another set of charts. The Valdari economy has contracted by 30%. The Thornian manufacturing sector is in crisis because they lost access to human rare earth elements. The smaller rim worlds that depended on human food shipments are experiencing severe shortages. President Grant nodded slowly. The picture was becoming clear. Humanity had been supporting galactic civilization not through equal partnership, but through massive subsidies that no one had bothered to calculate. Now that the subsidies were gone, the true cost of their former relationships was obvious. On Luna Station, Dr. Susan Blake was reviewing reports from across human space. The withdrawal had created unexpected opportunities for human science and research. Without the obligation to share every breakthrough with galactic partners, human scientists were making rapid advances in fields that had been stagnant for decades. "The Quantum Drive project is ahead of schedule," she told her assistant, Dr. Nicole Ward. "Without having to design compatibility protocols for alien ship systems, we can focus on pure performance improvements." Nicole was working on biological research that would have been impossible under the old galactic treaties. "The life extension treatments are showing remarkable results. Before the withdrawal, we had to make sure every medical advance could work with 17 different alien physiologies. Now we can optimize specifically for human biology." Captain Peter Shaw sat in Smokey Joe's bar on Titan Station, telling anyone who would listen about the changes he had seen. As a cargo hauler, he had spent most of his career moving supplies between human and alien worlds. Emergency medical equipment to Keth colonies, food shipments to Thornian research stations, industrial components to Valdari manufacturing centers. Used to be I'd spend 8 months out of every year carrying relief supplies to some alien world that had a crop failure or a mining accident, he said to the bartender Joe Clark. Always at cost or below cost because it was the right thing to do. Now I'm hauling luxury goods between Earth and the colonies, making 3 times the profit for half the travel time. Joe had been listening to similar stories for months. Human. Merchants were discovering that trading only within human space was far more profitable than their old galactic routes. Human colonies were buying from each other instead of importing from alien worlds. The human economy was becoming self-sufficient and prosperous. The transformation was not without its emotional costs. Many humans had formed genuine friendships with alien colleagues. They had worked together on projects that seemed important to the future of galactic civilization. The decision to walk away from those relationships had been painful for millions of people, but as the months passed and the reports came in, most humans began to understand what their leaders had recognized. They had been taken advantage of for so long that they had forgotten what normal relationships looked like. They had given so much of themselves to others that they had stopped investing in their own future. The galaxy had wanted them gone. Now, they were discovering what life was like without humanity's constant intervention and support. The humans were discovering what life was like when they put themselves first for a change. The first reports of the Gentari plague came through the galactic communication networks on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Susan Blake was eating breakfast in her Luna Station apartment when the emergency alerts started flooding her personal communicator. She had seen plagues before during her 20 years as a xenobiologist. This one was different. This one was designed to kill. The plague had started in the Outer Rim territories during what should have been a minor border skirmish between 2 species whose names most people could not pronounce. Someone had decided that biological weapons would end the conflict quickly and quietly. They had been wrong on both counts. The engineered virus had spread beyond the target population within hours and was now jumping between star systems faster than anyone could track it. Susan read the casualty reports with growing horror. The virus was attacking the nervous systems of every carbon-based life form it encountered. It did not care about species barriers or immune systems. It just killed everything it touched and moved on to find more victims. The death rate was 93% in the first wave of infections. In the old days, before the withdrawal, Earth's medical response teams would already be loading onto transport ships. Human doctors and scientists would be racing toward the infected zones with experimental treatments and biocontainment equipment. They would work around the clock until they found a cure or the plague burned itself out. It was what they had always done. It was what the galaxy expected them to. Dr. Susan Blake had the knowledge to synthesize a cure within 3 weeks. Her laboratory on Luna Station had the most advanced biomedical equipment in human space. She had worked on similar viral outbreaks 6 times in her career and had never failed to find a solution. She sent a formal request to the Department of Health asking for permission to assist with the crisis. The response came back in 4 hours. Permission denied. Humanity was no longer involved in galactic health emergencies. All medical resources were to be reserved for human populations only. Dr. Blake was ordered to monitor the situation but take no action beyond data collection. She stood at her laboratory window looking out at the Earth hanging in the black sky. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were dying from a disease she could cure. She had the tools and the knowledge and the desire to help, but she also had her orders. For the first time in her career, Dr. Susan Blake was being told to let people die when she could save them. The plague spread to 17 star systems before it finally began to slow down. By then, 43 million beings had died, including entire populations on 3 small colony worlds. The Galactic Health Organization published reports blaming inadequate quarantine procedures and poor interspecies medical cooperation. They did not mention that human medical teams could have stopped the outbreak in its first week. Captain Peter Shaw was hauling luxury electronics from Mars to the Jupiter colonies when he stopped at Ceres Station for fuel. The bar was full of cargo haulers like himself, all talking about the same thing. The refugee ships that were starting to show up at the edges of human space. "Saw a Valdari hospital ship yesterday," said Captain Mike Foster, a veteran hauler who worked the Saturn routes. "Must have had 10,000 sick people on board. They were just sitting there outside the Neptune defense perimeter asking for medical assistance." Peter had seen them too. Desperate ships from a dozen different species, all carrying the sick and wounded from various conflicts and disasters. They came to human space because everyone knew that humans had the best medical technology and the most generous aid policies. What they found instead were polite messages explaining that human assistance was no longer available. "It's hard to watch," said Captain Lisa Cooper, one of the few women working the outer system routes. "These people used to be our friends. We worked together for centuries. Now we're treating them like strangers." Joe Clark wiped down glasses behind the bar and listened to the conversation. He had been a merchant marine himself before retiring to run the station cantina. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but strangers is what they made us. Can't have it both ways." The cargo haulers fell silent. Everyone knew what Joe meant. The same species that were now begging for human help had voted to give away New Montana 6 months ago. They had made their choice about the value of human friendship. Now they were learning what life was like without it. The Galactic Trade Consortium collapsed on a Wednesday in the 3rd month of the plague outbreak. The consortium had been the backbone of interstellar commerce for over 2 centuries. It managed shipping routes, standardized currencies, and provided neutral trading posts where hostile species could conduct business safely. All of those services had been designed and maintained by human economists and engineers. The trading posts were built on human-controlled worlds or asteroids. The currency exchange systems ran on computers programmed with human software. The shipping route databases were updated by human navigators who knew every safe passage through dangerous space. When humanity withdrew, they took their infrastructure with them. The trading posts shut down or switched to serving human traffic only. The currency exchange system started showing massive errors as they tried to process transactions without human oversight. The shipping databases stopped updating, leaving traders to navigate by guesswork through areas that changed constantly due to asteroid movements and solar activity. Secretary of Commerce Paul Davis watched the collapse from his office in Washington. The reports coming in showed chaos throughout the galactic economy. Species that had been bitter enemies for generations were suddenly forced to trade directly with each other without neutral intermediaries. Ancient grudges made every transaction a potential military incident. The Keth and Thornian governments are accusing each other of currency manipulation, his aide, Jennifer Ross, reported. The Valdari are claiming that someone is sabotaging their shipping routes. The Rimworlds can't get basic supplies because nobody trusts anyone else's commercial codes. Paul nodded thoughtfully. The human withdrawal had revealed something that most galactic economists had never understood. The entire interstellar economy had been held together by human trust and human guarantees. When other species made trade agreements, they relied on human banks to hold the money and human auditors to verify the transactions. When disputes arose, they expected human arbitrators to settle them fairly. Now that system was gone and nothing had replaced it. Species were hoarding resources instead of trading them. Colonies were facing shortages of everything from food to medicine because supply chains that had worked for centuries were breaking down. The galactic economy was reverting to the same primitive barter systems that had existed before humanity joined the community of worlds. President Helen Grant met with her economic team every morning to review the latest reports. The picture was becoming clearer each day. Humanity had not just been a member of galactic civilization, they had been the foundation that made galactic civilization possible. Our own economy is stabilizing beautifully, Treasury Secretary Karen Clark reported. Without the drain of constant aid shipments and subsidized trade agreements, we're seeing unprecedented growth in every sector. The contrast was striking. Human space was prosperous and peaceful, while the rest of the galaxy descended into chaos and conflict. Human colonies were expanding and developing new technologies, while alien worlds struggled with basic supply shortages. The species that had taken human generosity for granted were learning what the universe looked like without it. The lesson was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity had been carrying the galaxy on their shoulders for so long that nobody remembered what it felt like to stand alone. 2 years had passed since humanity's silent departure when the Great Convergence War began. General Chris Martinez stood on the observation deck of Fort Armstrong, watching the refugee fleets gathering outside the solar system. The massive ships stretched across space like a broken necklace of lights, each one carrying thousands of beings who had fled their homeworlds as 7 major species found themselves locked in the largest conflict the galaxy had ever seen. The war had started the way most galactic conflicts did, with a simple mistake that spiraled out of control. A Valdari exploration ship had accidentally entered Keth space while running from Varan raiders. The Keth had fired warning shots that struck the ship's reactor core. The explosion had killed everyone aboard, including the daughter of a prominent Valdari senator. Within hours, both species were mobilizing their fleets. But this time, there were no human peacekeepers to establish neutral zones between the combatants. There were no human diplomats to arrange ceasefires and prisoner exchanges. There were no human patrol ships to keep the fighting from spreading to civilian areas. For the first time in 3 centuries, the galaxy's major powers were in direct contact with no one standing between them. The Thornian Empire had joined the conflict when Keth ships seeking supplies had entered their territory without permission. The Zelak Confederacy had been dragged in when Valdari forces retreated through their space. The Zarian Empire saw opportunity and launched attacks on everyone while they were distracted. Within 6 months, half the galaxy was burning. Chris watched. A hospital ship from the Valdari fleet requested permission to enter human space. The ship's medical bay was overflowing with wounded civilians who needed treatment that only human technology could provide. His orders were clear but painful. Provide humanitarian aid to individuals but offer no assistance to governments or military forces. Permission granted for medical evacuation of civilians only, he told his communications officer, Captain Danny Miller. Military personnel and government officials are not authorized to enter human space. The response came back quickly. The Fikes Valdari ship commander was grateful but confused. General Martinez, we have been allies for centuries. My government formally requests sanctuary for our diplomatic staff until this conflict ends. Chris had worked with Valdari forces for 15 years. He had friends among their officer corps and respect for their military traditions. But friendship was a luxury that humanity could no longer afford. Negative, Commander. Civilian refugees only. Your diplomats can find sanctuary elsewhere. The artificial intelligence networks that connected galactic governments had been failing for months. Engineer Rachel Cooper worked 16-hour days trying to maintain the quantum communication relays that linked human colonies. She was one of the few people who understood how completely the galaxy's information systems depended on human-designed protocols and human-maintained hardware. The Keth military network went dark yesterday, she reported to her supervisor, Chief Engineer Paul Davis. That makes 4 major communication grids that have failed in the past month. They're losing the ability to coordinate their own forces. Paul studied the diagnostic reports that Rachel had compiled. Before the withdrawal, teams of human technicians had traveled throughout the galaxy, updating software and replacing hardware in the vast network of relay stations that made interstellar communication possible. The alien species had provided the funding and the raw materials, but humans had done all the actual work. "How long before complete system failure?" he asked. "Another 6 months at most. The automated maintenance protocols are breaking down without regular updates. The quantum encryption keys are expiring faster than the local technicians can replace them. Most species never learned how their own communication systems actually work." The irony was not lost on either of them. The galaxy was fighting the largest war in its history while slowly losing the ability to communicate across interstellar distances. Military commanders were making critical decisions based on information that was days or weeks out of date. Battle plans were failing because orders could not reach the ships that needed them. Captain Lisa Hayes was patrolling the border of human space aboard the UES Guardian when she encountered the first Xerion expansion fleet. The sleek black ships had crossed into the former neutral zone that human forces used to patrol. Intelligence reports suggested they were heading for the abandoned mining colonies that several species had been forced to evacuate during the war. "Captain, the Xerion fleet commander is requesting permission to transit through human space," reported her communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Wright. "He claims they are conducting legitimate salvage operations on abandoned facilities." Lisa knew exactly what kind of salvage operations the Xerions conducted. They would strip every useful component from the abandoned colonies and then claim the territory as their own. Before the withdrawal, human patrol ships would have blocked such obvious expansionism. Now it was not their problem. Inform the Xerion commander that human space is closed to military vessels from all non-human governments. They are free to pursue their operations outside our borders. The Xerions had been emboldened by humanity's absence more than any other species. Their rapid expansion campaign had conquered 12 systems in 18 months, taking advantage of the chaos created by the larger war. Worlds that had been protected by human-guaranteed neutrality agreements were now defenseless against Xerion aggression. Dr. Nicole Ward published her research on galactic sociology from her office at the University of Luna. Her analysis of the conflict patterns emerging since the human withdrawal painted a disturbing picture of what galactic civilization really looked like beneath its peaceful surface. The evidence suggests that interstellar peace was not a natural state, but an artificial construct maintained by human intervention, she wrote in her latest paper. Remove that intervention, and the galaxy reverts to its historical pattern of constant warfare between competing species. Her data showed that every major galactic conflict of the past 3 centuries had been ended by human mediation. Every lasting peace treaty had been guaranteed by human military forces. Every neutral zone had been patrolled by human ships. The galaxy had not learned to live in peace. They had simply learned to let humans keep the peace for them. President Helen Grant read Dr. Ward's report in her private study late at night. The conclusions were sobering but not surprising. Humanity had spent 3 centuries trying to teach other species how to resolve conflicts without violence. The lesson had never taken hold because the students had never needed to learn it themselves. The refugee populations gathering at the edges of human space told the same story. Proud civilizations that had ruled star empires for millennia were reduced to begging for food and medical supplies from the humans they had dismissed as naive idealists. Species that had voted to sacrifice New Montana were now pleading for sanctuary in human-controlled systems. Fleet Admiral Laura Bennett reviewed the strategic assessments from her Pentagon office. The war was entering its third year, with no end in sight. Battle lines shifted constantly as exhausted fleets fought over resources that became scarcer each month. The galactic economy had collapsed completely, leaving even the winners unable to supply their own military forces. Casualties are approaching 1 billion across all combatant species, her aide, Colonel Frank Thompson, reported. Food shortages are widespread. Industrial production has fallen by 60%. At least 40 worlds have been completely evacuated. Laura had spent her career preparing for galactic threats that might endanger humanity. She had never imagined that the greatest threat would be the galaxy's inability to function without human leadership. The species that had taken human sacrifice for granted were now sacrificing each other in a war that served no purpose except mutual destruction. The message was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity had been more than the galaxy's peacekeepers. They had been the only thing standing between galactic civilization and galactic chaos. Now the chaos was winning. 5 years after the silent departure, Fleet Admiral Laura Bennett stood in her Pentagon office watching the morning news broadcasts from across human space. The reports painted a picture of unprecedented prosperity and growth. New colonies were being established at a rate not seen since the early expansion period. Scientific breakthroughs were announced weekly. The human economy had grown by 40% since the withdrawal began. Outside the solar system, the galaxy was a very different place. The Great Convergence War had finally ended not through victory, but through exhaustion. Billions were dead. Entire star systems lay in ruins. The survivors huddled in whatever safe zones they could find, trying to rebuild civilizations that had been shattered by 5 years of constant warfare. Laura's aide, Colonel Frank Thompson, entered with the daily intelligence briefings. Ma'am, the Confederation of Free Worlds has sent another delegation. They are requesting a formal meeting to discuss renewed cooperation agreements. The Confederation represented 23 smaller species that had banded together for mutual protection after their traditional allies had been destroyed in the war. They had learned the hard way that survival in the post-human galaxy required new forms of cooperation and compromise. What are they offering this time? Laura asked. Complete recognition of human territorial claims, exclusive mining rights in the Vega system, and a formal apology for the New Montana incident. In exchange, they want us to provide basic peacekeeping services for their trade routes. Laura shook her head. The same pattern repeated itself every few months. Desperate species would arrive at the edges of human space with increasingly generous offers in exchange for the services that humanity used to provide freely. The answer was always the same. Send them the standard response. Humanity no longer provides peacekeeping or mediation services to non-human governments, suggests they develop their own conflict resolution mechanisms. Captain Danny Miller commanded the exploration vessel New Horizon as it returned from humanity's first deep space expedition in 5 years. The mission had been a complete success. They had discovered 3 new habitable worlds beyond the galactic rim and established first contact with the Geltar, a peaceful species that had never encountered galactic civilization. The contrast between the Geltar and the species humanity had left behind was striking. The Geltar were genuinely peaceful, resolving their own disputes through patient discussion and compromise. They had developed sustainable technologies and stable governments, without needing external intervention. They were what the galactic species might have become if they had learned to solve their own problems instead of relying on human solutions. The Geltar are interested in limited trade agreements, Danny reported to Colonial Administration. They want to exchange scientific knowledge and cultural artifacts, but they have no interest in military alliances or mutual defense treaties. They seemed to understand that true friendship means respecting boundaries. The new relationship with the Geltar represented everything that humanity's old galactic partnerships had not been. It was based on mutual respect rather than dependence. It involved fair exchange rather than one-sided generosity. It recognized that both species had valuable contributions to make rather than assuming that humans would do all the giving. Dr. Susan Blake had become the leading expert on post-withdrawal galactic sociology. Her research station on Luna had spent 5 years documenting the changes that swept through known space after humanity's departure. The data told a story that few had expected, but everyone should have seen coming. Galactic civilization was never actually civilized, she explained to her graduate students during their weekly seminar. It was a collection of aggressive species held in check by human intervention. Remove that intervention and they immediately revert to their natural behavior patterns of territorial expansion and resource competition. The numbers supported her conclusions. Before the withdrawal, the galaxy had experienced an average of 2 major conflicts per decade, all of which had been resolved through human mediation. After the withdrawal, 47 separate wars had erupted in the first 3 years alone. Most had ended only when one side had been completely destroyed. "But what about species like the Valdari?" asked one student. "They seemed genuinely peaceful and cooperative." Dr. Blake pulled up footage from the Valdari-Thornian conflict that had erupted 2 years earlier. The Valdari maintained peace for centuries because human peacekeepers prevented their traditional enemies from attacking them. When those peacekeepers were withdrawn, the Valdari responded to threats exactly like every other species. They mobilized their fleets and fought to defend their territory. The lesson was clear but painful. Humanity had mistaken dependence for friendship and gratitude for genuine respect. The species they had protected and supported for centuries had never learned to be peaceful on their own. They had simply learned to let humans handle the difficult work of maintaining peace. President Helen Grant was in her final year in office when the Valdari delegation arrived on Earth. Ambassador Vel Theran looked older and more tired than she remembered. The war years had been hard on everyone, but perhaps hardest on those who had genuinely believed in the old system of galactic cooperation. "Madam President," Veltharan began, "I come to you not as a representative of my government, but as someone who considered humanity to be true friends. We made a terrible mistake 5 years ago. We allowed fear and political pressure to override our better judgment. We betrayed the trust that your people had placed in us." Helen listened carefully to the formal apology. It was more complete and more sincere than anything humanity had received from the galactic community. But apologies could not bring back the dead colonists of New Montana. They could not undo 5 years of warfare that human intervention could have prevented. "We appreciate your words, Ambassador," she replied, "but humanity has moved beyond the events of 5 years ago. We have found new purposes and new relationships that better serve our interests and our values." The truth was simpler than she could say publicly. Humanity had discovered that they were happier and more prosperous when they focused on their own development rather than constantly sacrificing for others. The withdrawal had been intended as punishment for the galaxy's betrayal. It had become liberation from relationships that had never been as mutual as they had seemed. Captain Peter Shaw made his final cargo run to the outer colonies before retiring from the merchant service. The route took him past the memorial station that marked the location of New Montana. The planet itself was gone, strip-mined by Xerion corporations until nothing remained but an asteroid field. 50,000 people used to live here, he told his co-pilot, Lieutenant Amy Wright. Farmers and teachers and engineers who thought they were building something permanent. The galaxy voted to give them away like they were just numbers on a balance sheet. Amy had been born after the withdrawal. To her generation, the old galactic civilization was ancient history. She had grown up in a universe where humans took care of humans, and everyone else was responsible for their own problems. "Do you miss it? The old days, I mean." Peter thought about the question carefully. He remembered the pride he had felt delivering relief supplies to alien colonies. He remembered the satisfaction of knowing that human generosity was making the galaxy a better place. But he also remembered the constant emergencies, the endless demands for help, the assumption that humans would always be available to solve everyone else's problems. "I miss believing that we were making a difference," he said finally. "I don't miss finding out that we were just being used." The Galactic Memorial Museum on Luna had become one of the most popular destinations for human tourists. Curator Frank Thompson gave the same tour dozens of times each week, walking visitors through exhibits that documented 3 centuries of human involvement in galactic affairs. The final exhibit was always the most powerful. It showed the voting record from the New Montana session alongside casualty reports from the 5 years of warfare that followed the human withdrawal. The numbers told the story more clearly than any words could. The species that voted to sacrifice our colony lost over 2 billion of their own people in the wars that followed, Frank explained to a group of school children. They gave away 50,000 human lives to maintain peace. When we left, they lost those 2 billion lives and still have no peace. The children always asked the same question. Will we ever go back and help them again? Frank's answer had been refined over years of giving these tours. We learned something important from our experience with the galaxy. You cannot build genuine peace by doing for others what they should be doing for themselves. Real peace comes from within. Until the galaxy learns that lesson, our help would only delay their education. The galaxy had wanted humanity to leave them alone. 5 years later, they had exactly what they had asked for. The humans were gone, and they were free to solve their problems in their own way. The fact that their solutions involved constant warfare and mutual destruction was their choice to make. Humanity had found something better. They had found themselves.